And I said, I really want to be you. And he said, okay, but let me tell you who I am. He said, every day I get up and I drive into a place where people are trying to kill me. He said, this is the only job I know.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. My name is Dan Morrison. I'm now a senior instructor here at the SOJC, School of Journalism and Communication. I've been here teaching for 16 years. My first 4 years I was an adjunct. I have a master's degree. I don't have a PhD, so I'm not technically a professor. I'm a senior instructor.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated, I was born and raised up in Washington State, a little town called Kelso Longview. Mm-hmm. And I graduated high school in 1970, joined the Marine Corps straight out of high school, was 4 years in the Marines. Went to the Eastern Washington University because I wanted to play college football, so I played football at Eastern Washington. Mm-hmm. Transferred to the University of Washington. Couldn't decide what major I wanted to declare. Just I had no idea what I wanted to do with myself.
Yeah.
So I dropped out of school and so backpacked through Europe and ended up in the Middle East. I lived in Israel for a year and was an amazing year. And then on a ship between Haifa going to Greece, I met a photojournalist and he explained to me what he did. I was sort of stunned that he got paid to travel around the world and do stuff. And so I said, cool, that's what I want to do. So I did some research on that, and the big programs were at Missouri, Western Kentucky, University of Texas. And I had lived in Missouri for a year and I wasn't crazy about going back there. So I decided to go to University of Texas. So I did. I started school there in 82, graduated in 84. I went back in the early 90s, got a master's degree from the LBJ School of Public Affairs. I went freelance. I've never worked for a newspaper. I was a stringer for Associated Press for about 4 or 5 years, which means I would go in to the office and say, what do you got? And they would give me a day job, basically. Mm-hmm. And I did that around the world. Because back in those days, once they knew you, you could go into any AP bureau anywhere and just introduce yourself. And I would tell them I work for Harry Cadlock out of Dallas. And then they'd say, good, we need some help, so go to work. So that was great. So I did that for a few years. And then decided to get married. Got married in 87. Promised my wife that when we started a family, I would quit going into war zones, and so I had been in 7 or 6 at that point.
Oh, dang.
We decided to start a family 2 years later in 89, and so I quit, and then I switched over to loosely defined hardcore adventure travel stuff. Mm-hmm. Going places that other people probably didn't want to go, and doing things that were sometimes risky. So that was great. I did that for 20 years.
Oh, dang.
Spent Halloween night in Dracula's Castle by myself, which is a real place in Transylvania, which is Romania. Spent 4.5 months at Mount Everest Base Camp with an expedition that put 3 people on the summit. Did all kinds of stuff. So I teach a lot of different classes. I teach photojournalism primarily, but I also teach writing classes in a class called Gateway and things like that. Heavily involved in a project called Science and Memory, where we teach students how to report on science. We take students each summer. We didn't get to do anything last summer because of the pandemic, but we take students up to a little fishing village called Cordova, which only has 2,000 permanent residents. There's only 12 miles of paved road, and that's from the town to the airport. Mm-hmm. And so we teach, but there's a lot of scientists that study a lot of things, climate change essentially. So we take them up there each summer. We take students and we live in a small little house for the entire month of July. We're now expanding that to do scientific report on scientists who are doing research on coral bleaching in Hawaii. So that's what I do. But there are people. Dennis Darling that took that picture of that little kid up there. He was my mentor when I was in photojournalism school. He radically changed my life too, because I said, look, here's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so he's the guy who taught me photojournalism. J.B. Colson's another guy. He's still alive. Mike Murphy. There's a few of them, but yeah, there's a couple of people I've met along the way that I sort of wish that I had kept in touch with, because especially the guy who said, this is a career. I just thought, wow, I wish I'd known who that was.
Yeah.
That I get asked fairly often, and I will tell you it's difficult to answer in a short answer. I can give you a long answer. Mm-hmm. I've been in 7 war zones, and so those were all astonishing experiences for various reasons. Was down in El Salvador in '82, and then went back in '84, and it was an incredibly dangerous place to be. I mean, incredibly dangerous. And there was death squads, and it was just a hell of a mess. So that was, I mean, it was, like I said, an astonishing experience, and so that sticks out, of course. Mm-hmm. But going into southern Lebanon when the Israelis were pushing the PLO out, that also was amazing. Being in Beirut when the U.S. Marines were there, that was amazing. I was in Afghanistan 10 years ago, embedded with a Marine unit of 2-6 Marines down in a place called Marja in Helmand Province, and that was amazing. So it's hard to say, but then again, it's like, I mean, I was with an expedition at Mount Everest in base camp, and they put 3 people on the summit. It's like, that was amazing. I spent a couple of weeks with Papua New Guinea cannibals. It's like running around naked with cannibals. It's like, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So I was really, really lucky in the sense that once I got started doing the kind of work I was doing, that's the kind of stories I would do. And in this business, they sort of say, well, he does this and he does that. And so once the word got out that I would go anywhere and do anything as long as it was remote, exotic, and probably dangerous, I got really great offers to go do stuff. I mean, I would get a call from a magazine one day, and they said, "Look, find the very best place to go scuba diving in the world, and we'll send you there." It's like, okay. And so that's a little island off the coast of Borneo, so I went there. So, it's impossible for me to say this is the best trip I ever took, but certainly New Guinea was up in that, because it was like those were full on. Wow, it was me running around naked with some guys who were going through a manhood ceremony, where the scarification ceremony. That was so unusual too, and meeting people there who didn't know the outside world existed until about 1950. They didn't know the rest of the world existed, and they saw an airplane before they saw a wheel, and that was so weird. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to find any place in the world that you can go that Westerners haven't already been there. But in New Guinea, you could go to places where they had never seen white people before. And that was just an unbelievable experience, and especially being with them when they were going through the scarification ceremony. That was biggie, but then I've been really lucky because people send me to some pretty amazing places. So,
man, so yeah.
But that's the hardest thing: how to find the balance between trying to be a responsible husband and father and doing a job that takes you away from your home. And again, if you're at home, you ain't making any money, so you got to be gone. And so that's the biggest challenge, to figure out how to do that. That's one of the reasons I went back to school and got a master's, because I could see where that was going, and I knew that someday I would want to teach. That way I could still do it. I mean, the truth of the matter is, if you're hired in academia, you do get 3 months off during the summer, and you do get a month and a half off in the wintertime. It's like, hey,
it's pretty good.
That's a pretty damn good job. And so I'm still lucky in the sense that every year I get to go up to Alaska and go to really remote areas and photograph grizzly bears and do stuff like that. And I'm very, very lucky, and essentially get paid to go scuba diving in Hawaii and do underwater photography on corals. Like, there are not many jobs like that around.
Dang.
But that is always the biggest challenge. People, J100, I always get a lot of students come in and say, I want to do what you did. And I say, cool, that means you're never going to get married. Like, what? Oh, what? So, and you can, but it's a big trade-off. I mean, it's a huge trade-off. I mean, how do you make it work? Most people can't. There's a really high rate of, a couple of things. There's a really high rate of divorce in this profession, and a very high rate of alcoholism and drug use and everything, is because you're always gone, and you're usually in a place that's dangerous, and the stress level is really high, and you're staying in some crappy hotel or whatever. That's the biggest challenge, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm